Hey everyone, what I have today is a couple of amazing people. We've got the Core Geek and Beverly Dowden, and they both just finished doing Sand Camp at Adam Savage's Silicon. It was amazing. Well, I was told it was amazing. I couldn't make it to that because I had another presentation to do. So I asked them if we could do a version of it sort of on a webcast. And well, here, let me just jump right in and let's go see what these two amazing humans have to say about stuff. There's this one time at Sand Camp.
That's how this whole idea started. I was in the car trying to think of like a fun workshop to do with Eric at Holiday Mastery, and I was in the car with my husband Brett. I was like, let's think of a catchy name first,
Right?
and then we'll think about the workshop. So Sand Camp. Oh, that's kind of catchy. I think Eric's gonna want to do that if I tell him that it's Sand Camp.
But the funny thing is when we approached talk about it, because he was the one that was in charge of our panels and stuff for Holomat, and I said, yeah, we're gonna do Sand Camp, and he's like, you're joking, right? He's like, a whole workshop about sanding, and we're like, yeah, it's gonna be great. And he's like, are okay, I guess.
Yeah.
Because sanding is like one of those things everybody wants to avoid, but if you want to bring your stuff to that next level, I think it's one of those things you just can't avoid,
Yeah.
That being said, depending on what discipline you're working in, foam or 3D printing, especially with the new 3D larger resin printers being way cheaper, easier to get hold of, still requires a bit of sanding, but not nearly as much as like doing old school filament printing. So there's always like caveats now, because as things go along, the products and things change and get better and easier and more accessible, like everything else. So I've had some people say, oh, I don't have to sand the resin print at all. Okay, fine. If you don't have to, you don't have to. That's great. I love more sanding, but at the same time, the less sanding you can do, the better. Just because it just takes up so much time. Time is money for everybody. So, or a form of currency. So,
that's true. And the less you're tinkering with the surface of an object to get it perfect, the less work. It goes hand in hand with the amount of work you're going to do. But if you start off with a really clean project or surface with minimal seams that you've connected very well, that's going to help reducing the amount of work you're going to have to do post as well. So do it in pre.
That's like the opening spiel of what I usually tell people at Sand Camp is that, it's better to start off with clean stuff. Yeah. It's always better to have clean cuts instead of trying to fill them in. It's just that. Especially when you work with foam. Foam is fairly inexpensive for most people. If you got to trash that piece and start over, trash that piece and start over. Get yourself, this is the one you recommend.
Yes.
A knife sharpener for your extended knife, right? Yeah. And it just takes a couple swipes.
Yeah.
But like every couple cuts, don't go like 10 cuts and then sharpen it. Like I literally, when I'm cutting foam, it's, I make 2 cuts and I sharpen. I make 2 cuts and I sharpen.
Yeah.
It's a little laborious, but having that really sharp knife and clean edges will always win over trying to make things go backwards, like Beverly said.
One thing that I found too is that you can buy ceramic blades for a lot of those utility knives, and those ceramic blades, they are amazing. They last about 10 times longer than a regular blade. So if you don't have that sharpener, now these things are expensive, but you can cut and cut and cut and cut and cut and not have to sharpen them. They seem to go through the foam. But the drawback is that in the end it's more expensive because the steel blades seem to last forever when you sharpen them with one of those honing tools.
Yeah, and that's kind of true of a lot of times people, when I post stuff, people are like, oh, you did so good on this because you have X, Y, or Z tool, right? Yeah. And that happens a lot where you get a lot of complaints. It's like, well, because of this tool, you're able to do this thing. It's like, well, that's true, but not necessarily the only way to do something. You can do really clean cuts with the most standard basic knife. Yeah, it just might take longer. A ceramic blade gives you an edge, and it's more expensive. But again, what currency are you spending? You know, time versus money versus quality, really. And so a lot of times better tools will level you up. It's still the person using the tool that really, you know, has the final say. So you can use a ceramic blade and still cut like crap, you know. but at the same time, I think people get really stuck on this. Well, if I don't have this whatever tool, I can't do this. And you can, it just might take longer. So
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I also see that a lot of people use like a Dremel tool, and I love Dremel tools, but they go fast. And if you don't have a dull piece of a dull drum or something like that to work with, you end up eating through or carving, usually making battle damage in your armor pre-paint.
well, I mean, Beverly, talk about Dremel. You're like a Dremel expert compared to me. So
Oh, really?
yeah.
I don't know about that. Okay.
Oh, come on. The armor behind you. I bet you used some dremeling on that.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I use a Dremel with a flex shaft, which is just an extension to help. Actually, I have it. Let me show you, because a lot of people don't know what these things are, but
Yeah.
it is a little bit of an investment, but this is the best thing that I've ever purchased. And I took it off my Dremel recently, but just pretend that there's a Dremel on the other end of this. But this is the thing that I use, and this gives you the best control. It also makes it so that the, if you can see, this neck right here is much thinner. So you have a lot more leeway when you're trying to get into tiny little spots where the neck won't get in the way, which has caused me a lot of grief. As soon as I got this thing, it was pretty amazing. It's changed my workflow quite a bit. But I use a Dremel with 2 speeds, and eventually I'm going to upgrade to one that has more speed, so I can have even more control. But that's really I think the best kind of tool that you can have to sand down your seams and carve EVA foam. Having a rotary tool is probably one of the more important tools that you can have in your shop if you're planning on using EVA foam, much as I do. And the way that I use it, it's just I clean edges off with it. I'll round off edges with it. I'll take a tiny little bit off of an edge to get it from a sharpened edge to a slightly softer edge, which makes a big difference when you're trying to finish something. But for clean seams, it's really important to have, if you've made a mistake with your cuts, which we all still do. I've been doing this for years and I still do that. Just going over your edges before you glue them together is really, really helpful for getting a really nice clean seam. And then once you're done, so what I'm talking about is gluing 2 edges of EVA foam, high density EVA foam, together with contact cement.
Right.
And I use barge.
Yep.
I've also recently used weldwood. Seems to work just fine. And in an emergency, I'll bring this with me to an event just in case I need to glue something. This is a different kind of a barge.
Yeah.
Stuff in the tube is it doesn't have the nasty chemicals in it as the regular barge. Various, all of us that have used it have found various success with it or not. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and since we're talking about glues, that's one of the first things that probably the second thing that I talk about when we're doing our sand camp intro is that when you're gluing your seams together, you need to first have that nice, sharp, really clean seam, really clean edge. 2 edges together, when they're clean, are gonna be much easier to work with. So you can use a rotary tool to clean them up if you need to. And then the next step is to glue them with minimal glue spilling out over the edges that you need to clean up later. So that is more of you've got to practice that a little bit to make sure that you're not just lathering on the glue. It just takes a little bit, and I usually use 2 layers. Some people just use 1,
Yeah.
but I'll always use 2, especially if it's a seam that is going to have any kind of like curve in it or any kind of force trying to take it apart. At least 2 seams, layers of the glue is what I like to use. But then sometimes it's just inevitable. You're going to have a little bit of globby glue on the seam. If that happens, you can take that off with the rotary tool as well. Just with a low speed and a grinding stone, which is this little guy right here.
So one thing that when you look at the glue, a thing that Evil Ted had taught me a while back is get some barge thinner or some contact cement thinner. Um, that stuff is freaking amazing because what it does is it thins out your glue pot essentially, and that globby stuff no longer happens because you can thin out the contact cement. In fact, I almost think that his barge can might be from the 70s and he just keeps using it by adding thinner.
Yeah, I mean, it lasts forever if you keep it alive, right?
Yeah.
Really, it's just the chemical that's evaporating that ends up solidifying it. So if you just, you know, give it a little shot every once in a while,
Yeah.
you can keep it alive for decades, I'm sure.
Yeah, but when it comes to that thinner, so I will say that I have that thinner and I've used it before, but it's very toxic. And
Oh, totally.
it's not allowed for that to be used. So if you don't have the right kind of ventilation, do not use that stuff in your kitchen. Don't even just point a fan out the window. You really need to have good ventilation to be using that stuff.
I would go as far as don't even
Maybe don't use it.
Like in the living part of your house.
Yeah.
Use it outside. Use it in your if you have a garage space.
Yeah.
Obviously, PPE is the most important thing because it does have xylene. I can't remember what the chemical is, but it's it's a chemical that's banned in Europe. They can't even get it in Europe. So.
And this is the respirator. Type you need to have. Do not use anything else. Yeah, this is I don't know how to pronounce this word. Noish. Eric, do you know?
It's the national standard, NOSH or whatever.
The thing is that with those, you got to be. Yeah, you got to be careful with those too, though, because the filters that you put on the cans are not all equal, and you got to look at the cans and make sure that they are protection against solvents versus protection against particulate, because the particulate ones are super cheap, and people go to the store and buy it and think that they have protection, and they don't.
Right. So this cartridge that I'm going to tell you is 60923, and that is appropriate for using the solvent. But you also have to replace them.
Yeah.
So don't keep it on forever.
And also, it's good because they have a charcoal filter in them. It's also good when you're not using it to store it in like a Ziploc bag, so like a gallon Ziploc bag, because that charcoal is always doing its thing, and it helps the life of it if you kind of don't expose it to open air. So just a tip.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't ever put mine in one, but I tell everybody else to.
Solid advice from your camp counselors.
And I find I forget that, like, I have a garage and I have ventilation in my garage, and therefore I'm not paying attention to the fact that I'm kind of privileged in that sense, and a lot of people are working in their house. So with ventilation, especially in the wintertime up in Canada, it can get pretty cold, and you don't just open your window and throw a fan in unless you want to spend through the nose. And some of you in the northern US is the same. So here's a trick that a friend of mine pointed out, or two things, and I was one of those where you're kind of gobsmacked. One is that he would do his sanding over by his oven and use the oven hood, and it would suck things out, or a bathroom and a bathroom fan. Is it the best case scenario? No, but it sure is better than nothing.
No, I was in a hurry one summer and I used my shower as a spray booth. So.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I mean, necessity is the mother of invention. I mean, a ventilated space that isn't going to have a lot of airflow. I mean, it worked great. I really needed some clean space. I didn't have a fan at the time.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, you can lock yourself in and go. It works.
We've covered a couple of the tools and sort of like, what you prefer to do, like making sure that your seams are correct and that you've glued things up properly. But even to the point of shaping things using a Dremel, one of the things that I always struggle with is at the end, like what kind of fine grit do you get? What is the final sort of sand that you do to get that texture? And then either use a heat gun or a lighter to kind of get rid of those pills. But I noticed on Beverly's, I'm always jealous that I know where the seams should be, but they have been sanded perfect, and it drives me crazy that I can't do that. So fill me in.
I have no secrets. I will tell you exactly what my steps are. Clean seams, clean glue, and then I use so I'm EVA foam all the way, and my gap filler. So I usually, if I my foam, I will use this stuff called Gap Filler. This is made by Proxxon. It is, they were having some supply problems, so he's kind of reformulating this, and so it's going to be available at TNT Cosplay Supply again really soon. But this stuff is amazing, and it's designed for EVA foam. Let's see if I have one that's open.
Designed by a cosplayer.
By a cosplayer,
specifically for this kind of stuff.
So it's a paste. This stuff is like whipped magic.
Whipped magic.
Really, really I love it. It is. He just changed his tagline to that because it's what it is. It's a standable. It's a water-based standable compound that you can put on EVA foam.
Right.
Is great at sticking to EVA foam. And then once it's dry, it has minimal shrinking, and it can be sanded. So you can sand it down with, I think it's like 220 grit or 320 grit. The problem though is that if you sand it down perfectly, the surface of the gap filler is going to be shinier and more perfect than the EVA foam. So once you paint your project, you're going to see those seams really well because they're perfect. They're perfectly covered, but they don't match the same. They're not the same surface anymore as the rest of the pieces. So to get a perfect surface like this, I will go over it again with another Prop Monkey project. I am not sponsored by Prop Monkey, by the way.
Yeah.
I just love this stuff. But it's great.
Dave Kramer, Prop Monkey, he's a great guy, friend of ours, and
he's awesome. We love
super
Dave.
shout out to him and his awesome product.
Right. You said it's water based, so maybe there are some solvents and stuff involved, but maybe it is a little safer to do.
Way safer.
It's definitely a healthier product.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can use these products in your kitchen. Like so a small little kitchen studio. This stuff is as safe as painting with acrylic paints. Not airbrushing with acrylic paints, but hand painting with. Because you don't airbrush, but you just brush it on or smear it on with your finger.
Yeah.
So the second step, so what I do is I cover my seams if they need it with the gap filler just to kind of give it like a better seam, a better finish. And then I'll paint over the entire project with this rapid fill.
Okay.
Which is also another sandable, it's a surface improver. So paint all of that on, sand it down lightly, and then you put a second layer on, sand that down as well. Just kind of repeat until it's perfectly smooth. And it's very, very flexible. It's so flexible, so it won't crack if you're like bending it like crazy.
Right.
And if you want to go even further, so if you're a competitor and you're like, I want this to look like shiny armor, sometimes it's really hard to get EVA foam to that point. I like to use another product called Fine Finish. Sorry, my brightness is a little. So this is just a finer particulate, finer particles. Same thing though, apply a few layers and then sand it down, and then it's perfect, ready for paint. And it's flexible and it's non-toxic. I really love it.
So what you're telling me here is that you have two things that I do not have. One, patience, and two, you're delicate, right? So if you're using a Dremel, you got to be light-handed. I'm not. I've got these big ham fists, and I'm like, and I'm impatient. So these are methods that I cannot ever employ, but I appreciate your candor.
Yeah, dremeling definitely takes an amount of skill. I think a lot of people give up on them right away. You know, there's a rotation to the bit, right?
Yeah.
You can work with the bit or opposite of the bit. Most people spend a lot of time working opposite of the bit, and that's when you end up with really bad gouges.
Right.
Because you're working against the natural rotation, and then that makes, especially if you're using like a heavier grit like sanding bit, like 120 or even like 80 grit, and that's just gonna just tear into EVA like in an instant.
Which, you know, if that's what you want, then great. If you're carving, when I was carving this, I used a lower grit bit.
Right.
But if you're trying to get things really clean and smooth, use a higher grit or even like a grinding stone. The nice thing about the grinding stones is they're almost smooth. And if you use a grinding stone and work with the rotation, right? So you basically let the tool walk itself.
Yep.
You don't even have to put pressure on it. And patience, but if you do that enough, it'll eventually create a nice smooth surface for you.
Yeah, and I like to use the highest speed possible as well with the grinding stone.
Okay, so I've got a couple things I tried recently, and I'm hoping this will surprise you guys as much as it surprised me, because Dremel tools and me, I love them for stuff, but I've destroyed more things with it than you can ever imagine.
Yeah.
So, you know the little green scrubby pads, these things here?
Yeah.
Okay, they actually sand foam, and they rough out the foam really well. Now that is one of those things where it is a rough way of carving stuff out. But years ago, I found this tool called a cut saw, and hopefully it's not going to be a mirror image. I'm going to show the other camera here. It's called a cut saw. Now it's it's basically a rasp, and I forget the material on it, but it's got just a really hard material on it. But this carves foam like magic. It cuts as fast as a Dremel, but you use your hand, so you have infinitely more control.
I think I'm still Team Dremel. Personally, I'm not sold on the manual labor. I have had a lot of practice with my Dremel, and yes, but this is interesting. The green pad.
Yeah.
Do you ever run into problems where it's hard to smooth out what you've done? Because it kind of makes a rough surface.
Totally. And
what do you do to smooth that down?
so that's the the same thing with Dremels. You probably don't do this, but I always use like a rougher grit to carve things out. Maybe this is my issue.
We're gonna send you some 320.
Okay, so I've got some 320. I've got some 320, but
Yeah, there, Ben. We'll sort you out.
yeah. But the thing is that you're right. It does leave a rough edge. But the thing is that just like sanding anything else, is that you go from like that rough grit to, I'll use like 120, and I'll sand everything off until it's at a uniform sort of pilliness. Then go to 220, and generally at that point, if I kiss it with some heat, it just seals things off and it looks fine. There's also another sander out there. It's called a Proxxon sander. It's a little tiny, little neat. It's all. How do I describe it? Yeah. And if, and
I've got one of those.
oh my God, I love that thing because it can get in those little tiny areas, and it just seems to solve so many little problems. And you don't use it often, but when you do, it is so valuable. It's disgusting.
Yeah, it's not. I think a lot of people think, oh, I got to get that, and then all my sanding needs will be fixed, and it's like, no, not really.
Yeah.
No.
Mostly because it's a vibrating head, and it's really hard to get into really, really tight edge stuff. If you're running up to like a wall of something,
Yep.
you can't like get it right in there because you end up banging against the wall.
Yeah.
I have one that is like super, super tiny. It's got like a really small tip that has like a detachable, like fixable tip. So I'll just put sticky back sandpaper on. That's what I would use for my resin cast pieces to get into the little crevices.
Hey everyone, I was unable to get the entire thing done right away, and I do apologize. The rest will be done on Thursday, but right now you're just going to have to deal with the first half, which is on EVA foam, and you just watched it. Next one is coming up in a couple of days. Stay tuned and subscribe, etc., 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 etc. We've got plenty more tips coming from Beverly and Eric. They are two of the most amazing people on the planet. They are so friendly, so sharing. Ugh, love these people.